Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining our second session of Tech Lead. My name is Shedrack Akintayo, and I am the Developer Relations Manager at Wilco. If you are yet unfamiliar with Wilco's mission is to empower every developer, regardless of their background or skill level, to unlock their full potential. To do so, we have created what we call a flight simulator for developers, where engineers can experience real-world scenarios that they will encounter in workplace through game-like quests. As I mentioned, this is our second session of Tech Lead, our brand new Twitter Space series, where each month we will interview a tech leader to discuss different topics technical team leads, different topics technical team leads deal with daily. Without further ado, I want to welcome Walnut CTO Danni Friedland and Wilco CEO on Friedland. Would you like to take over here?
Yeah, thanks, Shedley. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. The second episode. Hope you enjoy the first one, and we'll try to make this one just as interesting. And I have an amazing guest with me today. Danny is not only an amazing CTO, he's also a former colleague of mine who I really enjoyed working with. He's a friend, or at least I consider him a friend. Maybe it's not mutual. We'll see. Maybe that would be the first question. Um, and someone that I really enjoy listening to and has so many interesting insights. Um, it'll be mostly a free-flowing conversation, and then at some point maybe we'll open up to everyone else to ask questions. So, Danny, you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. With such an intro, I can only disappoint from this point on. So, first of all, pleasure to be here. I think that remote work is one of the top three topics that I like speaking about, and I'm feeling extremely passionate about that. As a trend, as is general. So, just briefly about me. Currently, the CTO of Walnut. Previously, founded another startup doing tech most of my adult life and also some of my non-adult life. Other than that, I used to say that I do other stuff, but nobody cares about that. So I do tech.
We care. We care. Tell us something interesting.
Something interesting. I used to grow 3 pet rats, and I used to put that on my Tinder profile. So that's my interesting tidbit.
Interesting. I didn't know rats could be pets.
They can. The question is better. Can they be good pets? And the answer is nah. But they can be pets. Like anything can be a pet if you try hard enough.
That sounds like a Meet the Parents quote. But we'll table that story for a different time, and I'm sure it'll be interesting. So, as Danny mentioned, he's the CTO of Walnut, one of my favorite companies, an exciting product, and they're doing really well, but also very interesting because their team is basically everywhere, right? And I remember at one time you were asking me about people I can recommend, and I'm like, with geography, and you said it doesn't matter at all. Now, I've seen companies where they have multiple locations. I've never worked for a fully remote company, but I've seen those. So I know you have done all of the above. So tell us a bit about the differences and what you see as the main pros and cons of fully remote.
Yeah, definitely. I can see a lot of Israeli listeners to the stream, and I think that for us Israelis, it's like we are coming actually from a very remote, anti-remote culture. I would even dare say, for various reasons, and it's also an amazing thing, right? That's the best part about Israel, that we're all close, connected, and loving that to some degree, right? Sometimes we're too close to each other. Um, so why would you even go remote, right? Why would you even do that? And when I'm saying remote here, for the sake of kind of clarity, I'm saying fully remote, distributed, like the whole pedal to the metal kind of thing, like go all the way. And I think that for me, as kind of the 90s child growing up in a very not great neighborhood in Israel, I kind of came to realize that you can make really meaningful relationship through online mechanisms. Would it be, games of the past, RSC or whatever forums? I like in my childhood, I made some really good friends online, and it felt real. And starting Walnut, we actually started in the middle of the COVID epidemic. So that was kind of probably the only way to go at the time, right? We could start doing some tricks, but I was kind of thinking, I don't see a reason of why remote wouldn't work. And I'm a very analytical kind of guy, so whatever I kind of don't see a reason, I might be not smart enough to figure out the reason, but I just couldn't see a reason of why wouldn't it work. I've seen communities being built. I've seen a lot of good stuff happening remote. We have some examples right now, like companies like GitLab. We have in Israel Elastic to a degree, and we have a bunch of companies like doing fully remote, no offices, no nothing. So it definitely can be achieved. We also realized that it's much harder to be achieved. Like we went to that with our eyes wide open, realizing that it wouldn't be the easiest way to do long term, etc. So yeah, I think the why is probably we didn't have a choice. The other why, my personal why, is I'm very passionate about working with good people. And I think that, and mainly talented people, and mainly passionate people. And I think that you have that when you limit yourself to some geographical constraints, but it's much harder to find like the top of the top people when you're just saying, I'm hiring in Tel Aviv. You can do that, but the game is just much different. So the pro, like the first pro for me, was the fact that I could hire amazing people, and that would be my focus for the first year of Walnut. I would just say, I'm hiring best of the best. I don't care what you are, but I wanted you to be like very, very experienced and everything. Like I would say, I want nice people. I want them experienced, and I want them to also, know how to write, know how to communicate, everything. And it's super hard. Like there aren't a lot of people like that, right? We all know how hard it is to find like, developers that can communicate well, are super experienced, are also not expensive, right? Especially with the salaries in Israel. Um, so this whole thing was really the only way I could find to reach those kind of people at semi scale. So that's the good thing, right? You broaden your horizon. And the other tiny thing is that our tech stack at Walnut is just the most niche tech stack ever, and we can speak about that like the most hipster niche stack, whatever you could imagine. And honestly, not hiring remotely, I think there are like literally zero developers who know this stack in Israel, right? So if I would go to choose this stack, I would just shoot myself in the foot trying to hire only in Israel.
Sounds like another episode waiting
Exactly.
to happen, but we'll get to that at some point too.
Exactly. And the bad part is like the downsides of remote is all the usual stuff, personal relationship. Um, I think I would divide them into like two categories. There are these things that you can solve, right? There are things that just require much more energy to solve, and there are the things that you will probably never solve. Like they're just different. You just need to embrace the fact that it's different, and you will never have this, let's grab coffee and, let's go after the office and drink some beer at the pub that we all hang out, or maybe see your colleague after work, just passing around Tel Aviv or something. And, these sort of things are just never happening in a remote constellation. So I think like everything is harder in remote except the things that good people can bring to the table. So you can hire amazing people and they can do amazing work, but managing them is harder. Maintaining this connection between people is super hard, and I think that the biggest other part that is really hard is trying to create this environment of startup, right? That initially you need this, I'm not sure how to say it in English, but you need this kind of fire, ups people access to deliver something. And I think that you can reach that to an extent, but it's nothing like you could have reached to when you have everybody in the office and you have this energy, right? You lose this kind of energy. But I'm not sure where the trade-off is. Like, are the kind of the fact that you can hire amazing people balance each other, balances the fact that you have kind of less of the startup energy, office energy that you have, or not? Like, if you ask me, it does. But again,
And there's no, doesn't mean that there's necessarily a right answer for everyone. To each their own. Just like tech stacks, right? And tabs versus spaces. We can always have heated debates on any topic in engineering. But an interesting question I have, a lot of times when I see remote teams, one of the challenges I'm seeing, or at least more accurately, I would say when I'm looking at my co-located team and I'm thinking what would happen if it turned remote, one of the biggest challenges I'm seeing is time zones. So for example, even though we work hybrid and people work from their homes some of the days and not everyone is in the office in the same day, everyone goes into the daily channel on Slack and updates what they're working on every morning, right? But
right.
morning is a local definition.
Right.
And async communication is great. I love Slack, but it works well when there aren't dependencies. But if you and I are dependent on each other and we work 10 hours apart in terms of time zones, and every time we want to have a conversation, we have to wait for the other, then a 5-minute conversation can turn into a 5-day conversation. So what are the things you're doing to avoid that or to live with that?
Yeah. I would add even another thing that I think is probably difficult to a lot of people, and that kind of, how do you, I would say a loaded word, but how do you measure engineers, right? How do you kind of get a feeling of, I don't want to get into whether should we measure engineers, but we all get a sense of we need some framework of thinking of, do people work in the office? I think that is also another difficulty. To your question, I think that remote work, what's I really like about this challenge is that it puts a lot of burden on management to create the environment to facilitate those kind of things. And I think that a lot of the things that we get for free in the office, which is just, dependencies, are semi-invisible. And as a manager, you don't necessarily have to tackle them at a small scale. But in remote work, you do have to tackle them at the very early kind of stage. You do have to think about that. And you do have to think about how people communicate. How do you create a framework for those communications? So I would just also say that Slack isn't really a sync communication. Slack is very sync communication. So like one of the things that we realized like early on is that we moved a lot of the conversation out of Slack and into some written document or written form. Because the biggest problem with Slack is that if you didn't woke up in the time of all the conversation happening, you kind of lost track, because Slack is very instant. So what we did, like one of the things that we introduced very early on is the concept of RFCs, which request for comments, very common term in the development world, and also very common in the way the internet was built. That's the first way it was built, and it worked really well. It's a different way of running R&D. It's a bit slower because obviously producing a document is not necessarily much, but it is slower than just writing code, etc. But you get better on that. but also it promotes transparency in the organization, which is amazing, right? If you are not in the conversation, you can always look after into what's happening, but also it promotes a lot of deep thinking into the problem, etc. So that's one thing that we did. We also really valued the sync time that we had. Like we always had like 2 hours of sync time, no matter the time zones. Like we found those hours and we did the meeting. It kind of forces you to be focused. It kind of forces you to not take the, in the office, you usually just go to somebody and just tap on the shoulder kind of thing. And, hey dude, or, can I grab you for a moment? So you don't have that. So how do you deal with that? You start becoming more intentional with those things. So okay, I need this guy. We have those 2 hours of sync. I will write myself down what I want to ask him or them, and I will be much more intentional with my communications. The great thing about that is if you manage, if you survive the first year of a startup, you live to tell. Then the great thing about that is, like right now at Walnut, we have somewhat around 40 different RFCs, 40. So if you join Walnut as a developer right now, you can see everything from the moment we were like 5 people startup, all the technical decisions that were made, all the discussions around them. So like when now we have developers coming to us and saying like, why the hell did we do that? I'm like, here you go. There's the discussion, that's what we knew back then. That was the thought process, and that's what we did. So the answer is that it's just different. It's slower. It's much more intentional, and it's much more in depth kind of discussions.
Got it. Something interesting that really resonated with me when I was listening to what you said is that we think of Slack, and for that matter, any corporate chat tool or company chat tool, this isn't specifically about Slack.
Right.
We think about it as a sync communication method, but the problem is that it's very conversational. The conversation is the forefront, but it's really hard to be async when the conversation is your main abstraction, right? And to be successful at this, what we need is something that's more wiki-like, where you have a page that is the outcome of all of that conversation, but the conversation available behind it in case you do want to go back and understand why things happen. So you have the what available as a page, and then the why available in case you need it.
Exactly. I think it's also one of the like curious thing about different UXs. I think that even Facebook posts, or replies, which theoretically you could use like Slack, but because it's just a bit slower and it's not live, people are not having those types of conversation in Slack in Facebook workspaces, for example. They are much more intentional in what they're writing, and in Slack you can just have like a lot of hey, hi, yo, whoa, ba, da da da. This kind of changes that just a wall of text that you need to read to just get to the point. So yeah, I definitely agree that moving more into more kind of more long form discussions and in-depth discussions is the way to go.
Cool. That's really interesting. Now, you mentioned that those in-depth discussions are slower, but as software engineers, we know that there's a difference between slower and scalable, or performance and scale are not necessarily
Right.
the same thing. So will you say that even though it's slower, it's more scalable? Can you increase the bandwidth even though it's slower? Or do you encounter a problem where developers have a certain amount of capacity and you just can't have too many RFCs open at the same time?
Yeah, amazing question. I think this kind of bandwidth versus quality is kind of very interesting topic to dig into. But that's where I inject my personal opinion. I think that transparency and focusing people to think before they communicate is actually a great thing. And obviously, you want both. you want these kind of chit-chatty conversations, and you want to know that people can jump, and it's okay to jump on a call and be in a sync meeting, etc. We do have those, right? We have a lot of those in the day. But I think that if you would ask developers, like, would they trade having to check Slack all the time and having to go to meetings? Like, all developers will say, dude, I'm not. I just want to get the information somehow. Like, they leave this part aside. How do we get the information? How do we exchange information? But if you ask them, like, they would love to get the information and they would love to just sit and do the work. And I think this kind of information sharing scales really well. The fact that you can have RFCs, and again, RFCs in Walnut are something that you're free to read or you're free not to read. It's up to you. It's just a way for us to share the information. We're also, a fun thing that we did is we also started doing management decisions in R&D as RFCs. So whenever we did a restructuring or introduced some process, etc., we, the management in Walnut, published an RFC saying, this is why we want to do this. This is how it's going to do. This is how we're going to do that. What do you guys think? And it was a really fun experience. Like, I feel that people are really happy being involved in this way. They don't need to sit through a meeting. They just get the sense of getting the information, getting the why of the information without having to kind of sit through the grind of the meeting.
Interesting. I have so many mechanical questions about this. Like, how do you browse and discover RFCs? At some point, like you said, you have 40 now, but at some point it's going to be 400 or 4,000, and you need some way of sorting through them. Another question is, when do you end them? So I think one of the problems with these types of conversations is that they can go on forever, and you need to figure out when to say, all right, time to make a decision. Let's do it.
How do you browse them? No idea. Somebody needs to build a tool for that. I haven't found one.
For the founders in the audience,
exactly.
This is a moment to listen.
Go build it. I will buy it. And how do you end that? I think that what worked really well for us is that we usually say until when it's open for comments. Like, the owner, like, again, the developer eventually needs to deliver the value, right? So, and if it's a big thing, then we tell them that, it should probably be an RFC, and we should probably, and again, like, we haven't talked about, like, we don't always do RFCs. Like, if all you need to do is just add a button, we don't expect you to do an RFC. So usually an RFC is something that requires multiple days of work. And it's a big change. We haven't defined that well, what is a big, but we kind of all know what is a big change in the system that requires other people's attention. So the person doing that knows that he has pressure to deliver, and when that happens, he just say, I have time for like 5 days of comments, and that's it. And then that's when I reach a decision, unless there's some like crazy, people that are really against something there. But funnily enough, we haven't had those, right? There aren't a lot of heated debates async. That's the cool thing. People have time to wind down, go play with the kids, go outside, do something. So it's an interesting dynamic.
That's interesting, because most people think that text is a more heated medium than conversation, because you can't pick up on body language and the hidden nuances, and some people just assume bad intention when they see text. But actually, what you said about the having a limited amount of time or something like that, what you're saying is that eventually the person starting the RFC is the decision maker, because we're used to think about code reviews, for example, when the reviewer in many cases is the decision maker. But what you're saying here is that it's reversed. The person is asking for feedback, but it's on them to decide when the conversation is good enough and they're okay with moving forward.
Exactly.
It's a model that instills more trust, if you will.
it instills trust, and it instills trust on the people commenting as well, right? The fact that we are running management decision through that is actually us saying that, we have nothing to hide, and we kind of, the decision that we're making, we can explain them, and we trust you to not leave kind of, stupid comments. And it's funny saying that, but again, when speaking with a lot of managers, there is a level of people kind of afraid of, okay, so will I, wouldn't people just leave a bunch of comments, and wouldn't it get out of hand? So the answer is, when you hire senior people, usually it doesn't, right? They all value their time, and that's the key, right? Everything I'm saying here works because we were able to hire only people with like 7+ years of experience initially.
Would you say it's about experience or about maturity?
I would say it's both, definitely. I think that there, like anything else, you need to have some experience in remote work communication. You need a way to reasonably well explain your ideas in a succinct way. So there is definitely a level of experience. There is definitely a level of experience in remote work. You kind of said that yourself. Like you want people to be able to express emotions in writing. It's a skill. It's something that you learn, and I think that a lot of us in Israel are not practicing that enough. But like, if you were to speak with somebody that works remotely, you will notice that their kind of ability to express themselves in a written form is just amazing. And it kind of blew my mind. Like, the first fully remote employee that we brought in was just so much better than me in expressing themselves in writing. So I would just spend time learning. And we also introduced some conventions, like whenever we leave, there is this thing called, forgot its name, but basically it can give you some hints on how to write feedback, and how to write kind of, I think it's more about PRs as well. Like, when you're saying you are noting something, just say, it's a note. Or if you are praising somebody, say it's a praise, and then write what you want to write. So there are a lot of tricks and experience to that as well, definitely.
Fascinating. This is really fascinating. I would imagine that it also makes it easier to expose toxic employees, because basically the system cannot work with toxic employees. Whereas, with a co-located company,
Right.
toxic employees might actually stay for a while because people, can avoid them or try to figure out ways to not interact with them. But
Right.
like you said, if you have to trust people not to leave snarky comments on RFCs, then the minute someone starts doing that, there it is. You realize they might not be the right person for you.
Exactly. And you can get also some of that signaling also in PRs as well. But I think the cool thing about RFCs is that they're much more conversational than PRs, right? PRs are more kind of straight to the point code. We are all engineers here, but RFCs are more kind of opening up, discussing ideas, etc. So it kind of exposes those. And I think the interesting part about the toxicity part is also, we had a bunch of cultures, so we had to deal with the fact that some of the times it felt like Israelis are just too direct in a way, or all the jokes
Israelis?
about.
No.
No, right. Actually, the funny thing about that the most similar people to Israelis are actually the Dutch, which I learned in Walnut. Like, we are basically the same culture, like super direct, like no sugar coating, none of those American kind of niceties. Just tell me what you think. So yeah, I definitely agree. It's a great way to kind of flattening out, opening everything, and allow like transparent communication.
So I want to switch gears and move to a slightly different topic, but still within the same theme. So you have an office in Israel, and I know you've had one since day one because I've been there. Uh, and obviously people come into the office and
Right.
others don't.
Right.
How do you prevent the class system from developing?
A very loaded question and a very good question at that. Um, so I think we spend a lot of time thinking about that. And I think one of the mistakes that I did initially that I actually came to the office, I think one of the remote work 101 explanation is that if you want to do remote, you first need to split up the management to actually, walk the walk and understand the pain. And I think that that was probably a mistake that I did initially. That I actually came to the office, and the office was co-located. Like right now, I'm sitting in a different office, more closer to my to the south of the city. So it's also the other way around. Funnily enough, like it's not everybody wants to come to the office. Like we had some departments that needs to come to the office because not like R&D was fully distributed in remote, but marketing, operations, etc., were co-located in the office. And there is no right answer. Like there are some people remote that want to go to the office. There are some people in the office who are like, I just want to work at home. And how do you deal with that? And also, there is this whole budgeting thing. You spend money on the office, right? So how do you spend money on the remote employees as well? So we came up with a bunch of solutions. We have remote office budget. So we're trying to think about the remote people as if they're in a different office. So I think I copied that from Stripe, which they basically said, we have sites, but the next site that we're building is global site. And it has everything. It has a budget. It has, everything the site has. And we started giving our remote employees a monthly budget for everything, from getting their own office space if they want, like WeWork, or paying for the internet, paying for coffee and yoga classes, whatever.
Or a happy hour. You have to do it all over the world simultaneously.
Or a happy hour, or how do you? So many things. How do you do? How do you celebrate holidays when you have 30 different nationalities in the company? Um, how do you do that? How do you even keep track of all the different of all the different cultures and everything? Super hard.
Yeah,
But
sounds like it is.
But super fun as well, right? You get to meet like so many different people. I learned about so many different countries and so many different kind of holidays and everything. It's just, for me, it's just super fun to go out of the Israeli and Tel Avivian bubble.
Cool. How often do you travel, or people on the team, how often do they travel?
Great question. So I think initially there was no travel, so that was fairly easy, right? It was COVID and everything, and I think that's like a very interesting example of the fact that remote work can actually work well. Like the first year of the company, we did zero offsites, zero nothing, like zero personal face-to-face connection with the people. And the moment that we got, like we did the first hackathon about, I think, almost a year now, and we brought everybody to Israel, all the developers, etc. No, I think back then we did that regionally. So we brought all the Europe people to Israel, and then we did another like small hackathon in Brazil. So we try to save costs basically, not flying everybody for a hackathon. But the funny thing is that the people that we met, like the moment that we met, it felt like really like we know each other because we worked closely with each other for so long. So the answer is that very rarely still we fly people, I don't know, like every half a year maybe. And we don't see a lot of need in that, to be honest. And I think that's probably the most kind of unexpected kind of understanding out of that.
I know you just had a worldwide
Yeah.
event where everyone came together. Any lessons that you've learned from this event?
That there is nothing like face to face, like flesh to flesh, handshakes and hugging and meeting people. There is nothing that compares to that. That's just reality. Um, and we definitely will do more out of that. I wish that we can do even more, like than once a year, like once every half a year or so. But again, the focus was on the personal part. Like it wasn't work related at all. It was all just having fun and creating those bonds that will last. And I think that it's even more important when part of the company is fully remote and the other part isn't. So you want to kind of bridge those gaps between the people that meet each other every day at the office and people who aren't.
So this is a sort of a hypothetical question, but I do want to see if we can make something interesting out of it. What is something that you encountered as a remote team and you said to yourself, if we were co-located, this would not be a problem. This would have been amazing. And the other way around, what is something that happened so well and you said, if we were co-located, this would have sucked?
Wow. Interesting. So I'm not sure if I have a great answer to that, but let me try. It was a very, I'm not prepared. So I think what worked well and would have sucked is I want to say again the communication part, but to dig deeper, I think that it wouldn't necessarily suck, but again, I think that my main point is around kind of the talent and and even more specifically about the talent is everybody speak about diversity, but I think that bringing a lot of different people from different nationalities is very awesome to diversity. Um, so I think that worked really well, and that's virtually impossible.
I can also imagine that it's way more friendly towards people with accessibility needs than having to come to the office every day.
So I think it's awesome for everybody after a certain age. That's for sure, right? We noticed the gap. Like young people really want the office, especially in Israel, but it's super friendly for women as well. That usually have other responsibilities still at the house, and it's not always equal. So that kind of creates an opportunity that we free up some hours of the day that they can instead of driving they can do other stuff. The flexibility that like remote work really goes hand in hand with flexible work, right? Because you can't like even initially we said that we don't measure time, we don't measure how much your time you spend in the chair. Basically, you can come and go as you please. All you need to say is just I'm out for an hour, going to the gym, going to the whatever, and that's it. And I think that's also worked really well. And I think at the office that might be, I don't know, frowned upon in a weird way, right? If your colleagues will start leaving for a gym in the middle of the day, I'm not a, maybe theoretically it could work, but I haven't worked at a place where that was like really the culture.
That is something I'm proud to say. We actually have, people at Wilco leaving midday to climb walls and come back,
Amazing.
which I think is really cool.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm all for that, and I think that but I think remote kind of forces you to do that. Like there is no way that you can start monitoring what people are doing, how much time they're spending in the chair, etc. Just you have other stuff to do.
And what about an example in the opposite direction?
What didn't work well? I think hiring is just a whole different ball game that didn't work well. Like in Israel, when I hire people, I know people at almost all the companies in Israel. So whenever I have a talent coming from Israel, I can easily pick up the phone and speak with, some level of management in that company that he worked in, and get kind of the behind the scenes feedback about them, you can do that remotely. And we had some people that we hired, and they turned out to be not what we expected. So we had to kind of fix a lot of, or come up with different ways to do our hiring process. Like in Israel, I would say that a lot of the hiring process is that kind of feedback, right? You talk with friends, your friends talk with friends, and that's it.
And how do you overcome that?
So I think we're still not great at that. I think that this is probably one of the biggest challenges that we have. I think that we are much better than that we used to be. So I think first of all, we are doing only home exams, and I know that it's a bit unpopular in a way, and people view that in different ways. We try to be as fair as possible about that, but we give you a fair chunk of work to do, like 5 hours of concentrated work. The task is very specific, and it's something that we build in house to actually measure your kind of the kind of work that you will do here.
Can you measure their ability to work remotely? Like, do you give them an RFC as part of the assignment, and they have to interact with other people?
So that's a great question. And initially, what we did is we kind of phrased the exam in a way that had some mistakes or some inclarities in it. And whenever I would send the exam, I would tell the person, I'm expecting you to communicate with me. Like back in the days when I did all the interviews, I would say to the people, here is my WhatsApp. And, because sometimes they would do that on Fridays and on days that I'm not working, so I wouldn't be available in more async mechanisms or platforms. So I would give them my WhatsApp, and I would tell them, I expect you to communicate. And that was actually a big chunk of the exam. What kind of question do they ask? How do they communicate? How they can explain the problem they're facing? Do they send a lot of messages, or do they think and write a big chunk of text that explains and kind of asks the questions? So that you can definitely measure that. And we also have a lot of regular video chats that we also measure this. Like we actively look in the way the person communicates throughout the process.
Got it. What are some of the tools that have helped you work fully remote and you would recommend others use?
So that's super interesting. I think the space is still very young, so there aren't a lot of solutions in that. There are the usual stuff, like we use Loom quite a lot to send some kind of snippets instead of doing a meeting. So we use that fairly heavily. We used to use a tool called GatherTown, if anybody heard of that, but it's kind of like a gamified office space. So you kind of log in, you have your small avatar, you actually sit at a desk. And the fun thing about that is that it solves the need of the kind of the tap on the shoulder. So whenever I want to speak with you, for example, I can walk my little avatar to your desk, and I can just say, "Hey, on," and your earphones will always be on. Your video is off and your mic is off, but I can always speak to you. So I can always say, "Hey, do you have a moment?" And then you can just open the app and it will immediately jump to a conversation. So it's a small thing, but it's really helpful. And the other part of that is that you can see when people are speaking and you can join the conversation, which is very limited in Slack, Huddle, and all those kind of things, where they're Zoom specifically, if you're not invited, you're not invited. So that's another tool that really helped. And I think that's it. Like there aren't many tools in the space. So again, for the founders out there, it's ripe for innovation.
I was actually invited to a meeting over Gather once,
Oh,
in a different company, and I actually had the experience of coming into an empty office and looking for someone to help me find the person I'm supposed to meet. I was like moving around, moving my avatar around,
yeah.
trying to find people to tap on the shoulder and say, "Hey, I'm a bit lost here. Can you point me at the person I need?" Which was, in a way, novel, but in another way, frustrating as well. Okay. Before we maybe let a couple of people ask questions from the audience, moving to a very different topic, you mentioned in the beginning that you have a unique tech stack. Tell us about it.
Oh yeah. Wow. And I will probably get a lot of um, opinions about that. So first of all, I think that tech stacks do matter, and tech stacks do matter in the kind of problem space that you're facing, and also they're like everything else in development. They have some personal biases and opinions, and philosophies about them. So the tech stack that we're using is Elixir on the back end, which is kind of Erlang variant. Erlang is a very old, solid language, even older than Java, by the way. Still actively used mainly in Europe. In Israel, it didn't cut on at all. And Elixir is kind of the modern variant of that. Why Elixir? Um, Basically, everything we're doing that is stable on the internet is probably written in Elixir. So banking is Elixir, WhatsApp is Elixir, Facebook chat was Elixir. So um, RabbitMQ is Erlang, but it's the same. So a lot of the stable stuff is built on that paradigm in a way, and that kind of alludes to what we're doing. Like at Walnut, we're doing demos, and we promise you that the demos will not crash. And that's a very kind of big promise to make as a small startup that building something. So I was looking for something that will help us build stable software, which is something that is fairly unusual, right? Because we optimize for speed, not for stability, when building something. Um, so Elixir is amazing for that. We still didn't had any server crashes throughout the we had one like server crash throughout the 3 years of Walnut existence, which is amazing. No matter the scale, no matter everything, it just works. And the more controversial choice on that is we started using on the client-side a language called Rescript, which is an OCaml-based language. Why? We can get into what I think about TypeScript, etc., etc. But we just really liked it. I think that it's really enjoyable, and I think the small trick about kind of what people are missing about stack choosing is the connection with hiring and segmentation within hiring. So whenever you pick a tech stack, usually tech leaders go and say, but how will I hire 1,000 engineers with this tech stack? And I think that the question that tech leaders should ask themselves more is, how do I hire the first amazing 10 engineers in the tech stack? And hiring is just like marketing. It's all about segmentation and finding the segment that works well. And the cool thing about using niche languages is that you usually find very passionate people about that. And those passionate people have not a lot of places they can work at. So we were able to hire like really amazing people that were like, passionate about that. And those are people that are self-taught and they're kind of self-motivated to do. And those are exactly the type of people that you're looking for, right? And I would say that in more mainstream languages, it's much harder. It's on you to test if they're self-motivated, if they're, self, whatever. So yeah, Rescript, we're still doing React. Everything else is super boring. Like we have React, we have Postgres as a database. We are not doing microservices. We just have a single server. It just works. We don't do anything else exciting, just those two languages for the kind of the very untraditional parts of Walnut.
So it's a single server, but because it's over the Erlang VM, I'm assuming that it's comprised of a lot of processes that each one of them is independent and could fail and respawn itself. So in a way, it is microservices, just a different abstraction level.
So first of all, you have 5 points from me for kind of getting the Beam and Erlang VM right. So the answer is yes. And I'm curious how you know that, but
It's part of my job to know these things.
amazing, amazing.
Okay, so I want to open this up to questions from the audience. If you want to ask a question, you can request to be a speaker, and then I'll turn it on and you'll be able to ask. I can also just randomly call on people and assume that they have a question. That sometimes works. Okay.
Can I pick somebody? I want to really curious about Etty, what her opinion, like what question that she has.
All right, Etty, what do you say?
Hi, Danny.
So I've invited Eddie to speak. All right, there we go.
Yes, I wanted to ask how you handle like onboarding new employees remotely.
Amazing question. So one thing that we haven't spoken about is that some of the processes while doing remote are less forgiving to half-assing that, you know, as a startup you usually do. So usually as a startup, you're onboarding pretty much, you know, just, you know, go speak with that person when you first start. So from the first half year, we had a very detailed onboarding list. You know, we had Asana that goes through all the tasks that you need to do. We had a 1 week, 2 weeks, and 3 weeks check-in with the manager. We had a very kind of detailed way of how you both what do you expect out of an onboarded people after a week, after 2 weeks, after 3 weeks, and after a month in the company, but also what kind of tasks we can give them. So we invested a lot of kind of how do we, you know, break down tasks and leave some tasks like the easy task for the new joiners to, you know, get their hands dirty. So I think we have nothing unique. I think that we have some what other companies probably invest in reaching much more mature age. We had to do very, very early on.
Amazing, thank you.
Cool. So with that, I'll wrap it up. Thank you so much. This was eye-opening. I've learned a lot.
Thank you.
You know, we're doing hybrid work, which is very different in many ways, but also very similar. And I really connect to what you said about management having to lead by example. And we do the same thing, you know, because we're hybrid and everyone comes in different days, our management team also comes in different days and we try to spread them over the week. So I can connect to a lot of things, but I've also learned so many new things. And I'm definitely going to look into the RFC approach and see if it works for hybrid as well. So thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you everyone for listening. And we'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. And if you need some templates or anything, let me know. I'm happy to share them.
Awesome stuff.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining. Thank you, On. Thank you, Danny. Looking forward to the next episode. See you all next time.